About that. It's okay. Alrighty. Let us begin. So I come here, as I said, every Thursday, and I teach them to pay attention. And I use this bell and typically, I think a normal, typical person, maybe you're doing this, you're listening to the bell, hear it resonate, and you try to follow that sound, right, to its end. And then when it ends, I continue. So today, as I was doing it, and I do this sometimes with kids, they started out energetic, and then they realize, now the littles, they have a more difficult time, but that's okay too. So what I'll do is, typically I'll just sit at the edge of that stage right there. I turned around and I went to the littles one at a time, and I had them hit. So they would hit it. I didn't have to say anything, they knew. I just handed it over to them, put it in front of them, and then hit it. Then I went to the next little, and then the next little, and so on. That's teaching without really teaching, at least not directly. So I do a lot of that. By this time, you're probably familiar and aware of how I teach, right? It's not imposing, and it's often indirect. Now, some of it's direct. About 7 years ago, the principal at the time at Woodland Park at the time asked me to come in to teach kids mindfulness and meditation. I taught them a variety of practices, such as compassion, humility, walking, sitting, lying down. So essentially, they were just learning how to self-regulate. So one of the things I also taught them, and this I just saw an adolescent about a couple of hours ago, 3 o'clock. She came in and she was complaining to me about how terrible her teachers are. She had a legitimate gripe based on what she shared with me. But I can't imagine all teachers are terrible. So perhaps there was some catastrophic thinking going on, or overgeneralization. So at the school, Woodland Park, going back there, it reminded me of this. I would go into the kindergarten class first, and then at the time there were 3, and then the first graders, second and third. So what I did was teach them compassion in relation to relationship. So one of the things I introduced to them was this whole notion that all teachers are like precious gems. So teachers come in many forms, educators, parents, all right? So there's a concept for it in Tibetan Buddhism. It's Rinpoche. So Rinpoche is interpreted loosely as precious one. And it's often ascribed to teachers, or perhaps of the highest grade, meaning status. So I expressed to them why it was important to demonstrate respect to the precious one, that being the teacher. So when you encounter a teacher, I explained them to be a kind of precious jewel or gem. That's the other interpretation of Rinpoche. Precious gem, again ascribed to the highest status of teachers. So when you encounter a gem, you do your best to polish it. So you polish it in the form of demonstrating compassion. So I would demonstrate polishing like this to the kids, and they would laugh. You polish the gem every time you encounter a teacher. When they are that young, they are quite impressionable. That's just part of their biological makeup. That's just how they function. So to teach them very early on it's very crucial. Let me ask you a question, Paul. Has Jasmine ever, and you can be honest with me because I won't ever talk to her about it anyway, ever in any way disrespected you that you can recall? She's been with you for 3 years, so there's got to be.
Well, since I've been doing the conscious parenting and my mind shifted on certain things, I would say no.
No?
No.
Okay. That's because you're a precious gem. As I was sitting and listening to this teenager, the part of the reason why she's in there to see me is because there's this great disconnect with the world around her, and it starts with her parents. She has next to no relationship with her parents. She's not inspired by them. She does not admire them. As a matter of fact, she thinks, although they are somewhat supportive, they don't make the best of parents. And she has her reasons. So I thought, how much as I was listening to her, I think that is not just an important piece of education for our children, but as a conscious teacher, I take that into consideration every time I see a child. So, every child is a precious gem. And they are, in some instances, polished. In other instances, they need a little polishing. And how you do it matters. So by this time, you probably know the effect and the impact that you have in the manner in which you teach. That makes a difference for your child and especially for yourself. Because by this time, you should be aware and know that conscious parenting is really two processes, if you can reduce it down. One is the awareness of what's going on in the moment, that moment between you and your child. Nothing really needs to be said or done. You're just aware of this moment. And there's a preciousness wrapped around that alone. And the second part, you should know by now also, is that conscious parenting, and here's where it's very activated and requires a lot of effort. It's self-reflection. The second part. A whole lot of conscious parenting is about self-reflecting or recognizing what's going on in this moment. That is, what are you giving off? What are you noticing from your child? And how are you responding accordingly? Okay? So, precious gem. That was instilled in me at a very young age. And I think there are cultural differences, you may agree, between how we respond and show respect to our elders, right? I suppose here, right? Yeah. And granted, there are cultural differences in terms of perspective, because we're a more independent, autonomous culture, and in Asia it's more collective. So again, granted that there are differences there, but nonetheless, whether it's here or there, I think you can still teach your children, yes, that everyone or anyone that you encounter is a precious gem in a way. It doesn't matter what culture you're in, all right? Perhaps there's more emphasis in Asia, and they have concepts like Rinpoche, which describe a teacher as a precious gem. I don't think we have that kind of a notion of consciousness about that here. Although we teach our kids to be very respectful, right? To be respectful to grandparents or parents or teachers. But here it's more of an engagement in intellectual pursuit as opposed to a practice itself. So because they are a precious gem, for example, I'm inclined to hand this over to them today, which I did, but I do so in such a way that they're so precious that they feel my presence and they feel their own because I'm attending. And they hit the bell. So afterwards, a couple of the kids just came up to me and they do this thing. They knuckles me. Knuckles. Mindful. Knuckles. That's how we do it. I didn't ask for it. They just came up to me. And Jackson was one of them. And he did this thing. And I extended my fist like so, out of respect and kindness. Just the way he was treating me in the moment. He was very gentle. It took us an hour to reach each other, but there we were. Present to one another. And he does this thing. And then a second kid came up to me and just did the same thing. His sister. And continues to continue. I think that's quite the legacy that we can offer if we are conscious. And our kids are capable of that. They start that way. And then over time, it starts to wane. Because there's so much going on in their life and so much going on in their relationships. But they still have that. It's obvious to me that they're able to come in. And maybe I facilitate that or I trigger that in them. But the possibility, as I stand back and think about that, the possibility, whatever you want to create in the child in terms of instilling virtues is there. The possibility is there. And you provide that service, and you do so first and foremost by example. Questions or comments before I continue?
I think I have a question. It was kind of touched on before about kids that come in contact with this a little bit later than the littles. So you said maybe start with choices or extend that. But with that ability to be conscious as a child, does that come out pretty quickly, or are there other kind of steps in between the choices and that sort of?
It can. I can go many directions with your questions. With your son, it can. So he's one who comes up to me as well and just does this thing. So it's in there. It's in there. It's always been in there. It's not something that I really taught. It's just reminding him again of the possibility that is his potential. And I really believe most, if not all, kids have that potential. Yes, we make a huge difference. We are catalysts in a way. for our children, consciousness specifically, and with your son, if I could speak freely, he's quite already aware of things. I was watching him today too, with other kids, not just him, but with other kids too, and he was just sitting right there in the end of the couch and just observing. He was interacting and engaging, but once in a while he was observing, and I noticed that he was looking up at one time. A thought must have just occurred, because he was looking to the right, which means there was some creative thinking going on. I did not ask, I did not impose. I was curious, but my point is not him and the other kids I see in here too. When I like to do, what I like to do is sometimes when the opportunity arises, I'll make eye contact with them, and then they'll just look at me with their big old eyes, especially the little kids, big old eyes. And I try to keep it there. Say nothing. Just be there. And they're present, I'm present. I need not shift or change a thing. I don't need to add or subtract. They turn away, I'll turn away. So we're communicating all the time, one way or the other. But that form of communication is more commonly expressed or manifested in Asian cultures. We're here, verbosity, it's all about talking out your feelings, right? Or free association, we call it in psychology, because it makes us feel good. That's not necessarily true, by the way, research shows. Just talking about your feelings in therapy doesn't necessarily actually is effective at all. But in any case, in Asia, it's about, what do you think it is about? Yeah. To put it simply, the energy. Observing and watching other people's movements, noticing other people, gestures, right? Actions, because everyone's communicating in one way or the other, yeah? Any other questions or comments? But you keep going, you keep doing. This is a lot of undoing, a lot of unfolding in children to get where they need to get. For older kids, that holds true to parents as well. Who here isn't without history of pain or suffering? Yeah. We all have, right? To some degree, a breakup in a relationship, a death of a family member or a pet, right? Conflict with your boss or so on, yeah. You watch TV, right? See what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, right? So, not in Russia, but the soldiers themselves. So a lot of horrific things we're exposed to. So suffering can both be experienced directly or osmotically, right? Okay. I want to read you something and then you respond. If you like, you can even stand up next to me, Wendy. So many. False preconceived notions and ideas of what it means to be a good parent can potentially hurt our children without us realizing so. The intimacy which we have with our children may feel to us as genuine, do not necessarily qualify as true intimacy because it lacks. Our listening is ineffective, our tone and attitude misplaced, and our connection with them disingenuous and insincere. For instance, if a parent perceives respect as the most important thing a child can learn, anything a child does or does not do will be gauged by this ideal. This ideal influences how the parents interact and reacts to a child when they are perceived as disrespectful. What do you think? This style of parenting is really a courageous form of parenting. I think more so than any other form because it requires so much introspection, self-reflection, or looking into yourself and questioning yourself. She is wisest who knows that she is not wise, right?
I feel like it's also one of immense trust.
Yeah.
Because as we travel through this, you really have to get to the point where you, even when you see them struggle and outwardly failing, like I just got a dissertation on someone's behavior the other day, and I would say acted in ways that do not align with my morals or values. But in that conversation, knowing the correction will not come from my lecture. And the correction will not come from me pointing out all the failings of thinking, the failings of judgment, the failure in action. Knowing in that moment the best thing I can do is be open and receptive and appreciative of the sharing of a story, and just keep that environment, but also trust that my child is going to learn what they need to learn and grow in the ways they need to grow, but it's not going to come from all of my pushing and shoving and shaping and forming and wisdom. And it's a really, I feel like a lot of what I'm practicing now is releasing the need to say something or give them the answer or tell them how they were wrong and what they should have done, and just really trust that the process is going to work out the way that the process needs to work out, and that they'll grow and learn and become what is inside of them is going to be the thing that carries them through. It will emerge. The diamond will be shined, and the rough edges knocked off. But it won't all come through me. And if it comes through me, then it breaks the relationship. And then what you were just reading, that intimacy is I'm making it up. The reciprocation is that they don't feel the intimacy. I am manifesting intimacy that doesn't exist. So I think a lot of it is trusting that our children have what they need inside of them, and that they're going to go through the processes that they need to go through to learn what they need to learn. Those won't come through me. I just get to witness and support and be available.
That's like the hardest habits and insecurities to break along the path of not unassuming and being intimate, right? Is that, like you said, the trust is the hardest part to have faith in, to find when you feel like you're not doing anything.
Yeah, because society tells us we're supposed to shape, and if they're not fitting societal norms, that it's our job to step in and change that. Like, I was listening to somebody at Walmart the other day, and the cashier was like, well, that's because your mom is teaching you to have good manners. And immediately I thought, and I was like, did you say thank you, or were you so modeling gratitude and appreciation for somebody else's time and service but I'm like, no, because we're supposed to tell you how to be. We're supposed to make you be this thing. So when you take your hands off and open your heart to the process, it's like a heart on parenting. But your hands come off a little bit, it feels like, where like society does not always look upon the tantrum and the mom sitting on the floor with a lot of grace. So you have to be so centered. In that moment you feel like you need to protect
from that societal pressure and judgment, but at the same time, be open to it and model it. So
I heard on the radio. Sorry, I saw you just raise your hand in front of me.
Sorry, we're drummers here.
I was listening to something. It was something on NPR. And somebody was sharing. There was this clinical psychologist, and he talked about this thing that you guys were mentioning, but as thinking of shepherding, like you are a shepherd versus like a creator, one who's building and clay molding and do this and do that, but like shepherds keep their flocks safe, and they lead them, they make sure they don't like push them around unless they have to.
Unless there's a wolf or something on the line.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like you're
For
really
safety's
skinny
sake.
when you do that.
So it was interesting what it made me, it was interesting because I hadn't read much about the conscious parenting style or whatever, and then I heard it, and then I was reading it, and then it's like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like this, like that one guy.
Yeah.
I love that too. I've had a friend who was like really into the whole concept of shepherding, and they really lead from behind. They're not up in front. They're behind the flock, and there's such intimacy and relationship that each one of them know the call for each one of the flock. Like when you're historically looking at that practice, it's a really intimate practice with a lot of relationship and trust built in.
You were gonna say something.
I have a question, but you can go ahead.
Our Western religious tradition comes from a place where human beings are born flawed. That's where we start from. And so with parenting, it seemed that you have to redeem and improve your child. And I think that infiltrates a lot of our perspectives on parenting versus a perspective where a child is created whole and it's just our purpose to witness their development.
My philosophy and religion practice is compassion, but I have to embody that, right? There is a shaping of my child. However, it's done through osmotic emotional osmosis or psychological osmosis. It's an observing of how I am and handle things, which then she takes on that same role. Yes.
So I have a question about kind of what you said about, basically you're saying, your most important thing is respect, and they don't actually respect you, they just know like what they'll kind of get in trouble. It's not like, so false words or something, for instance, like a child that is maybe a little older that we haven't used this style of parenting and now we're trying, and we really are wanting her to have her true feelings and emotions, because everything feels like it's like people only said what she knows, either one parent or another parent or whoever wants to hear her interest or borrow her. And when you want to foster her embracing her own, I guess, how do you do that without, when she says something and it's like an ingenuine, like that's something that like mother, father, whatever has said before, it's a copied saying or emotion or feeling, but you're also trying to let them be them, but that's not them.
That's brilliant.
Start this, she's a little older, and we're trying to not attack what she's saying, but get her to realize, like we've even said, like we want to know the real you, we don't want to hear what you think we want to hear. I mean, how do you go about that without, I guess, with using that style, because you're supposed to let them be them. They think they're being them, but they're not. So that may be a longer, I don't know if there's a quick answer to that, but
Do you think she's experimenting?
I just don't know if she even knows how, I think, but how do we foster her feeling comfortable and kind of, when she does say things that we know probably aren't, that are just a reflection of someone else, like without sounding like we're shutting her down because we want her to, I guess, someone that doesn't want to be conscious, like that fights it for probably several reasons or whatever, but and how do we embrace that without feeling like we're correcting or teaching, I guess?
Yeah, probably because of fear for whatever reasons or insecurity. It's very difficult to ourselves be conscious, because an aspect or dimension of being conscious means you have to be okay with feeling vulnerable, your flaws. And I don't think children, as they get older, are given that opportunity, or something happens in our parenting that we have facilitated in them this defense style, where you find them protecting themselves again, so they're not genuine. And then what you also see, I'm thinking about this adolescent I was speaking of. She's lost. She's 16. She talks like the way she describes her mom to be. So I refer to that because there isn't really any authenticness. Again, I think a lot of people would argue against that, but I do not see it based on my observation experience, not just children, but who we are as human beings. We're not willing to be vulnerable. We're not comfortable connecting or relating. So we borrow each other's, like especially kids, it's called mimicry. So to that, I want to read something here, okay? Many children act and react, if you listen very carefully, not out of disrespect, but rather fear. They may be just dysregulated, they may be just impulsive, or they may just be creative. There is a concept that I thought about, and it's based on my experience working with children. I refer to as pedo-angst, that is childhood anxiety. Essentially, I'll go ahead and read it instead to help you understand what that is. So pedo-angst is the tension of living with parent or parents and institutions, just like school, who is not aware of the child. There's a power differential, I think, in every system of the child's experience, whether it's parents or teachers, or where there's someone, which is typically the adult figure, governing the child. So I'll read it again. Pedo-angst. The tension of living with a parent or a detached society that involves all forms of systems who is not aware of the child. It creates a paradox of living and having a relationship with parents or these individuals in these institutions while ultimately feeling alone. So,
It's just confined to children.
confined to children?
Lots of adults who experience that too.
Yeah, I read a book one time by this child psychologist. He said he found a cure to help all children get healthy. Every one of them. Remove the parents. Ouch, it hurt me. Talk about hurt to the core, right? So going back to what I said, this is troubling. I mean, this whole concept describes a troubling pattern or phenomenon as I see it. But then again, please, it's just based on observation. And I like suffering. So when I see suffering, I'm hypersensitive to it. So the connection, again, is disingenuous. It lacks passion, lacks emotional and relational comfort. There's an absence of vulnerability. And therefore, there is no true presence in the moment. It creates a false reality. These children grow up to be identical to who we are. So they develop these false identities. It's referred to as ontological insecurity. Ontology, again, is the study of being or becoming a human being. Yes? So, let's go back to your question. How do we then, at this point, especially for adolescents, provide a setting so that they can strip away all this madness that is their exposure to what we have imposed or instilled in them. Now, that being said, we will do that. We can't. The reason why we will always impose and instill in them is because we have an ego. You're not going to get rid of that. But we often define that as with the best intention, right? And some of that is okay. Like bedtime at 8, it's okay, right? But it's how you do it, and the manner in which you do it can make sense. You don't have to involve your ego. Pure connectivity should be a priority. That's it, connectivity. Over instilling values or coercing children to behave. My wife and I did not realize what it meant to be a listener until we learned why it was important to be sentient or conscious while listening, to which we refer to as sentient listening. Compassionate listening is very much intertwined with consciousness. There is a noticeable resonance of joy for the child when unconditional and empathic listening becomes the realization. Listening in its purest form is absent of judgment, expectations, and demands. Most of what we refer to as listening is listening lacking. It is essentially listening that is not flexible. It is listening without curiosity and wonderment, which speaks to the child's own. It is listening that does not allow the experience of awareness to flow intersubjectively. Sentient listening does not lead to the obligation that one feels teaching is necessary. Parental verbosity disguised as teaching is insecurity disguised as parenting. How do you feel about that? These are very tough ideas and concepts to grasp. But as I said, if you are courageous and open enough, what you see is a whole different process within yourself. True evolution, actual enlightenment, right? So what we have now is referred to as false enlightenment, right? We think we know. But how do you feel about that? The realization that you are flawed and that you are probably creating some damage. But that's okay too, right? Or is it? It depends, right? But how do you feel about that?
That's hard to find the faith, I think. Because you want to accomplish these things. But the point of accomplishment or enlightenment is unknown for you or your child. So to have faith that your quietness, sitting with them without talking, validating or questioning but not responding, that's the right path for, it's hard to trust that in the moment. It's hard to have that faith from, weeks to days to weeks, months, that it is the right thing and that it will transcend, but it's difficult.
If you don't do some damage, will they ever develop their own enlightenment?
Yes. And here's when it happens, the moment they move out of your house. Yep. There is a burst in growth and development the moment they move out of your home. Yeah.
But I will say that that's shifty sand, because I had my very best friend growing up, her mom was clinical in all kinds of ways. So I'm not saying it was like the general run of milk, but her her whole parenting philosophy was, if I'm really hard on you, life will feel
Yeah.
easy.
Wow.
Life never feels easy, one. And it just is a really tumultuous relationship to have with your only caregiver, too. Like, I think we should definitely be gracious with ourselves, for sure. And, like, they'll have a mental health bill at some point in all of their lives, and they can tell their counselors about me, for sure. But, yeah, I think the more wholeheartedly we can get on this conscious parenting vibe.
I think if we accept that we're going to incur some damage and we're conscious about that, then we can choose where we fail versus being mindless and reckless.
Yeah.
I wonder how much damage is lessened when your kid
Right.
sees that.
Or at least if you acknowledge it along
Yeah.
the way. That's where I feel like I could,
Yeah.
yeah.
And when we're practicing consciousness in proximity to them, and they see our internal evolution, I think it opens up lots of possibilities for them to work through their own things.
Verbalize the response. Or
Practicing
to,
consciousness, if you're truly like, involved in it, means that you are aware that you are not perfect and you will make mistakes. So then you will also, I'm not saying like the words of diet or whatever, that you would plan or expect flaws or mistakes, then it won't self-sabotage or ruin.
You're speaking the language. Ah, beautiful, every one of you. That is looking at parenting through a conscious lens. All of that which you said is a realization, a recognition. Yes. And And I appreciate that, because not in this book, there's nowhere that it is said that you become this perfect parent. It's all about recognizing your flaws, foibles, and not necessarily eradicating them. You're shaking your head, Wendy. Yeah.
Choosing your battles.
Yeah. Not getting rid of them. There are certain things that can derive from being more conscious, like humility is a good practice, right? And you become more humble as parents. Then you become even more masterful at recognizing how flawed you are. And then there is an aspect too, because part of consciousness and under the umbrella of consciousness or mindfulness practice, all that gratitude and compassion and the sensitivity I talked to you about is directed inward, right? Other compassion and respect to these precious gems around us, and loving kindness, which is compassion directed within. That's ultimately the evolutionary process for parents. It leads to that evolution. Is that when we can smile at ourselves or demonstrate compassion or humility, we are halfway there. Other questions or comments?
I wonder about why our biology, or I guess what I'm calling biology, fights against those things to like, I wonder if it's to like help your kid or, you know, save them, protect them, whatever it is, you know, I feel like it's something that you can't control, and so I feel like some of the consciousness pushes against that, just like innate kind of draw to help and be there and make them be okay, sort of thing. So I feel like it's a hard mental battle getting to the place where you can fighting against your mind, I guess. I wonder if there's actual evolutionary components that, for some reason, guide you in that direction.
Many factors play a role, not just history. I often talk about biology as a factor, gender. Males and females respond and react differently to children, right? Or to life in general. Culture as well. I may see the world differently than you may see the world, right? There are many things that does play a role. So we're not negating any of that at all. We're fighting a very tough battle uphill with all these factors at play. But we also have the capacity to reason, be aware, and make sense of the world around us. This part of the brain is starting to develop, at least for about 2% of us. But that's solid. 2% of, 7 billion people? I joke, but no, we all have that capacity. Sometimes we're lacking, or for whatever reason we regress. But regression may be also a biological need. Anger, for example, is regression, right? Defense against perceived threats. Road rage, man, that's so legit. I don't blame them. When they get out of the car and smash your car with a bat, they're perceiving threat, right? They should go to prison, but because there still has to be accountability. So funny, as I'm saying that, there's a chapter in here referred to as radical accountability requires emotional vulnerability. There cannot be true vulnerability if there's a power differential between parent and child. If the parent is, oh man, that's pretty good. When there is no vulnerability and connection, there's only shame and no connection to the child. Either the child feels bad or they feel disconnected. When you approach the relationship as if both of you have something to offer, that's the thing. Recognition that both of you have something to offer. Right? There was a point I said, just for argument's sake, that every parent is on the continuum of authoritarian practice. Because if respect is important to you, you're an authoritarian. I know you like to think you're authoritative, like you're fair and equal. That is not true. That is true, but my point is this. Be very cautious. Your mind tricks itself into thinking that what you're doing is right in the name of love. That's what Shafali says, right? In the name of love, we do all things terrible without realizing it. We want them to make good grades. We want them to eventually go to college. We want them to buy all good things. However, at what expense? So we have to be careful. So it's not about the house, it's not about the grades, it's not about the job. It's the disconnect. And many of the children I see, that's what they're suffering from. We call it anxiety, depression, right? It's ontological insecurity as a result of disconnect. All right. Any other comments or questions? Yes.
I have a question. I don't at all want you to take this the wrong way. It was just more, the first one you talked about the research that the numbers show of the authoritarian and the spanking and stuff like that. So since this is a new, I'm just strictly curious. I don't want you to think anything negative toward it because I do believe this is great. But I'm just wondering, since this is a fairly new concept of parenting, is there research to show what the kids parented under conscious parenting like as adults? Yeah, I guess that's what I'm wondering.
That I'm not familiar with. But there are aspects of conscious parenting that has been researched, like empathy is considered probably the greatest of traits in terms of providing connection. Like they did research on where they ask patients and clients, they expose them to different therapists, and they ask them, which of the therapists did you feel you benefited from the most? And each of one picked one. And the one they picked, they said, demonstrated greater empathy, greater compassion.
So as we were going through these trainings and stuff, early on in my education career, it was authoritative parenting, I think, was like the bullseye of what you wanted. And so when this rolled around, we did a book our first year when we started the school. I think it was Awakened Family, wasn't it, Ellen, that you started with us?
Conscious parenting, isn't it?
I think we jumped into the Awakened Family first,
Oh.
and then we went into the Conscious Parent.
Oh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember, Tiffany, you were there too. But I remember thinking, like, okay, originally permissive parenting was like, you don't want to go there, right? Like, that's where you leave your kid alone, there's detachment, you do whatever they say, kind of thing. So I was curious, like, how are these things different? And because there were similarities that kind of sounded like crossed over, right? If I'm just listening to my kid, you know, where am I? How am I not getting walked all over? Or, you know, those type of questions came to my mind. So anyways, I started doing some research, and I think there's 2017 and 2019. And I can't remember if it was out of Cambridge or, anyways, there was maybe back in 2005, 2010, they started tracking the kids who went through surveys like this type of parenting. And I guess things you wouldn't be surprised about, like less abuse with substances, seem to be like more regulated, more independent, sure of themselves. I think I'm remembering the abstract out of this research. But anyways, it sounds like it's kind of new, right? It's not a lot out there, but some of the stuff I have seen is showing like good outcomes in the sense of.
I'm not doubting it at all. I was just
I
curious
have the
because
same
it is a
one.
newer concept, so you're always
Yeah.
afraid, what if this concept screws
Right.
up this way? So
Yeah.
There's anthropological studies looking at different cultures and how they raise kids and what the outcomes are.
That's true too.
Yeah, because
Mm.
this sounds
Yeah.
new, but when you
Mm.
look hunter-gatherer,
Yeah.
we've talked about that a lot because it's a lot of the way that our educational system works here.
Yeah.
So we've done tons of digging into what are the outcomes, because that really is a concern. Like, what are we doing? Is it the right thing? We want to know those things. So, yeah, the anthropological studies are probably obviously the longest lasting, but it's a really similar style to the modeling rather than the telling and the teaching.
And even the commentary from a lot of the researchers that do it is just fascinating because they talk about kids who are independent that can work collaboratively, who can solve problems on their own, who are self-directed. And it's like, dude, that's what my kid needs in this world.
Yeah, and the narrative, I think, in conscious parenting matters, the language that we use when we're engaging with children. So it's not that it's permissive, like when a child hits another child, you approach that child and said, I noticed that you hit little Sammy. Is there anything I can do to help in this moment that could help you be a better sister for little Sam? So I do engage. But listening is very powerful because it will reflect back.
And that's one of the biggest things I think I've noticed between the first conversations we've had all together, and we'll share. We have your emails, so there's a couple of podcasts we did with Cons, and we'll share those, and then I'll find the research that I was talking about and try to share that up. But it's actually the most active style of parenting, right? You're actually you're imposing your attention,
Investing.
like intensely, on yourself, but the child too. So, right, it's actually the most. It's a paradox. It's active but not active, right? It's actually a letting go and sitting back and watching it, but there's that attention that's just right. It's just super focused on that interaction.
Yeah, non-action action.
Yeah.
You come in here, you're just noticing what's going on in the space, and they notice you're noticing. So there's very active, and they're building their awareness through you because you're observing and watching them. right? So,
One of the circle ups, we had a kid who was trying to do an announcement, and they were kind of spinning out, right? They were a younger kid. We had just played tag on the other side or something. Something was going on, but they were up shouting, and it was to where I was getting bothered, and the other kids were getting bothered, and I'm thinking like, trying to like, tell the kid to be quiet, and Khan just like looked right at him, and like slowly moved to him, and then got down at their level, and to see them come down with that, the evidence was there, just in the moment to see how effective that approach is. So it was cool to see.
I approached this situation. I'm not sure if you're talking about the same, but I approached this girl, and she was a little bit out of sorts, and I just staring her in the eyes. I did not need to say anything. How I was saying more and enough. And she just looked at me. She sat in the chair. I got down on my knees, and I extended my hands like this, and she placed her hands on mine. And then I just comforted her. And then she maintained. I didn't have to say, hey, why did you hit? There were parts where she was pushing this other child. Didn't need to say that. Just held her hand. I didn't need to reprimand her. Just held her hand. Just let her know, let her know that I'm here in this time of need and struggle for her. Just held her hand. Didn't need to punish her. Just held her hand. Shift, calm down, and then I let go. And she still sat there and just started talking about her day. So it's not, you're not doing anything. It's referred to as non-action, action. You're paying attention. It's intense because you're constantly paying attention. Like 24/7, you're paying attention. When you're with a child, you're not doing anything else, but you're paying attention. Even when you're on your phone, you're paying attention. Like this. Makes them paranoid, but it's good for them. Did that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. So that's how you're teaching. You're just resonating this presence for them, and they will detect it. They will recognize it. This particular girl, she all over the place, made eye contact. Immediately, she came, sat on the chair. Again, I kneeled down, extended my hand. Whether she puts it on or not, she will let me know. If she doesn't, then I release. That's how you do it. You don't even need to say anything. Save your words for your husband or wife. Yeah. But for your kids, you can teach them. They'll be masterful at recognizing too. Right? They'll be masterful at body language and reading body language. All right, well, thank you very much. I'll see you next year. Right? Or is it next week? Next week.
Hey, Con, what book were you pulling out of?
Oh, this is mine. I'm writing a book. So
we don't, does it have a title yet?
Conscious Parents, The Conscious Parent, Self-Reflective Parenting.
i.e. parenting guilt.
Ooh. Oh, okay. Let me read this part. This is great. Okay. Let me read this part. Some of the concepts and ideas we introduce may be difficult to understand or psychically palatable. Well, not psychically palatable because it reaches to the core of our insecurities. So there's a warning. But if one were to embrace and be open to the possibility of, it will lead to deeper connection, self-satisfaction, and an easiness of being as parent. There will be less desire to want to change the child, and that will lead to more awakening of the beauty that is their natural state. It is permission. Natural state tension. Parenting may not be for the faint of heart, and so it requires the kind of attention that is necessary to assure the security we are providing the best we can. However, it may not be sufficient to simply say that we are, as parents, are doing the best we can, particularly when we see how much of our children suffer. But keeps on going, but there's a warning. Yeah, it's hard. It will, as I said, a lot of insecurities bring up, but in the end, I fix it. It's called undoing. It's forgiveness in the end, right? Chapter 12 or something like that.
Radical self-acceptance, is that in there?
Okay, here, look. Get a frame, a metaphor for radical acceptance. That's the title of the last chapter. All right, thank you.
Thank
Catch
you.
up.
Thank you very much.
I know, we turn the heater off. Now I'm like, oh, I need a cup of tea.
Hey, Travis.
Mm,
You do the personal counseling, yes?
I do.
With parents, family, or just children?
I actually started with adults. And then I had a psychologist who wanted for me to transition to children. So I do both.
Do you have capacity on your caseload to?
I still do.
You do?
Yes.
Do you have a card with you?
Oh, yes, yes. What are you thinking, though?
Well, I think this has been huge I feel like for us.
Wait, there's a
but
lot of dynamics.
yes, and I want to hear more. This one, 3 sessions was nothing. You know, it was just a,
First of all, our kids are a little older. We're a split.
yeah, it's a split household, so there's another
Oh,
dynamic.
that's a whole different, also.
Right.
So there's just a lot.
And my daughter in the divorce, and years now, 6 years after, she's that's who we're talking about.
I think the
struggling.
divorce is what made her
Hmm.
plate do the mimicry to mom and dad in a time of where she saw they needed her, and now I feel like that's her whole
Yeah, and I feel like she stays at that
youth level.
that
She-
she was 5 and and I feel like she's not there still. She's grown, but she also resorts back to that kind of
But when we try to connect
mindness.
we try to connect with her, it's like she thinks she needs to get taught that in order for us to like. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, that's my. That's.
And it I would say it sounds worse than what it is, but it is still present. You know what I mean?
Yes,
It's fairly common.
yes. So are you thinking then that she may need some assistance, or you
I would
prefer?
love her to, but even just since taking this class, we had a session like, hey, let's just talk. And
It's
she
very.
didn't
It
want to
became
talk.
very obvious that she was very uncomfortable with looking in her own self, which is obviously an issue. She it almost emotionally she became having to think, you know, and even doing things like you said, like asking questions, like it makes her visibly upset, and she does not want to have to. So obviously, there's trauma or hurt that she does not want to visit. I think that's.
And I had her in counseling right after the divorce because I had full custody of her. And then she's been to like horse therapy as well.
She went
But
to
she
that for more. She has anxiety,
Yeah.
which you talked about the pain and angst, which is very
huge
much.
anxiety. And she had that even before the divorce. She was always an anxious little girl. So I think it's way better than now than it has ever been. But
But I still think that anxiety, even to be herself, or feel like it's so. I mean, I think it's so disconnected. She's so disconnected.
Hold 1 second. I forgot to turn this off, but I'll make sure.
Yeah.
Here it is. Man, you need us back.
All good. That would have been great. It would have recorded you all night.